وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera dan salam Malaysia Madani. Kita merapatkan syukur kerana ada kesempatan pada pagi ini untuk kita melaksanakan suatu agenda bagi menyemarakkan kepedulian kita dalam konteks kemanusiaan sejagat dan secara spesifik melihat kepada apa yang sampai ke hari ini sudah hampir masuk ke hari ke-100 ya, pembantaian, kezaliman, pembunuhan berlaku. Dalam zaman yang moden ini, kita pun menerima maklumat setiap hari di depan mata kita melihat perkara ini. Dan ia harus segera dituntaskan, peperangan mesti segera dihentikan dengan kekal. Saya ucapkan selamat datang kepada semua yang hadir ke program kita pada hari ini. Bicara Ikhtisas Forum, bagi forum pertama akan membahaskan topik Palestin Merdeka, Krisis Asia Barat dan Ketempangan Ideal Geopolitik Global. Hari ini merupakan hari yang penting kerana kita sedang dalam momentum ke arah suatu himpunan besar seluruh dunia, global, sejagat pada 13 Januari akan datang. Pada hari Sabtu di Malaysia akan dilakukan himpunan di depan Kedutaan Besar Amerika Syarikat. Dalam masa yang sama seluruh dunia juga mengadakan himpunan itu. Walau bagaimanapun, harus kita ingat bahawa krisis ini tidak akan berhenti sekiranya tidak ada konsistensi dalam konteks memberikan tekanan dan juga menyediakan suatu wahana yang lebih kondusif untuk keamanan sejagat ini berlangsung. Dalam erti kata lain, meletakkan keadilan pada tempatnya, di mana para oppressor yang agresif ini melakukan pembantaian, pembunuhan, mengenepikan apa yang kita sebut sebagai undang-undang antarabangsa, segala macam resolution yang dikeluarkan di peringkat UN itu juga diabaikan. Dan lebih 7 dekad penjajahan yang berlaku, kalau tidak kita lakukan sesuatu secara strategik, lebih agresif dan juga merangkumi pelbagai elemen secara lebih kreatif, segala macam cara untuk kita pastikan kita memberikan tekanan kepada kuasa besar dunia yang logiknya dah berubah hari ini ya. Jadi sebab itu kita membahaskan perkara ini pada hari ini di pagi hari 11 Januari 2024 dengan membawakan 2 orang panelis. Yang pertama saya perkenalkan saudara Zulaiman Zulkifli yang merupakan Presiden Persatuan Kebangsaan Pelajar Islam Malaysia PKPIM, dan seterusnya merupakan sahabat kita saudara Dr. Muslim Imran, pengasas pengarah Asia Middle East Center for Research and Dialogue, AMEC. Jadi insya-Allah pada hari ini kita akan bahas, saya fikir ini bukan sesuatu yang baru dalam pengetahuan kita masing-masing, tapi kita nak dapatkan apakah update kemas kini, dalam masa yang sama juga memberikan kita suntikan idea, gagasan dan juga tindakan selepasnya untuk kita sama-sama meletakkan keadilan pada tempatnya kembali di atas muka bumi ini. Jadi saya nak mulakan dulu dengan memberikan suatu pertanyaan kepada saudara Muslim tentang khasnya perihal kondisi semasa. So we are now in the middle of confusion actually. This is the crossroads between the ideal of geopolitics. We are talking about the world, a world that upholding the very principle of human rights. But what's happened in Palestine and in Gaza in specific, it is not giving the kind of reflection of the ideals in the world politics. So just your brief comment on that, what is happening, and what are the kind of action that we can take based on that very principle that has been agreed upon by the world communities, the government, especially in the West as well as in the East and all around the world. Please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, selamat pagi. Pertama sekali saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Abim dan Bitara, khususnya kepada sahabat saya Encik Fazril, jazakumullahu khairan, dan rakan panelis Encik Zulaiman. My dear brothers and sisters, thank you for your presence here today. We are convening on the 96th day of this ongoing genocide in Gaza. 96 days. That's more than 3 months already. What started as a Palestinian response to an ongoing Israeli apartheid and ethnic cleansing has opened, in a way, the Pandora's box to expose Israel's practices to the whole world. For the Palestinians, we have known Israel for decades, 75 years of occupation. We know that Israel is an apartheid regime. We know that Israel is a genocidal, unfortunately, society, not just regime. We know that they see us as lower class of humans, subhumans, and in the words of the Israeli defense minister, human animals. We know all of that. But it was probably fate that made Israelis expose themselves to the whole world. Now, not only Palestinians know that Israel is led by genocidal maniacs, but the whole world knows that. You just open Instagram, in spite of the restrictions and the censorship, you open Instagram, Twitter, or even Facebook, and you will see what the Israeli regime is all about. It's about killing babies. No war in modern history has seen this huge proportion of child victims. They are targeting children. They are targeting the younger generation. They don't want Palestinians to continue to exist in Gaza. And interestingly enough, they say that publicly. In their press conferences, in their interviews, they make it very clear. Israeli ministers, Israeli members of the Knesset or parliament, Israeli Prime Minister himself, when he delivers speeches, he quotes genocidal verses of the Torah, explaining how they are going to treat the Palestinians in Gaza. So the world used to say that it's the crazy Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, these extreme right-wing ministers who are actually out there causing or calling for genocide. Because if you remember, the Israeli finance minister Smotrich, a few months ago, literally said, wipe out Hawara. Hawara is a Palestinian town in the West Bank. But this ongoing war has exposed the whole Israeli political establishment. They stand for genocide. That's exactly their principal belief, that Palestine from the river to the sea should not have any non-Jewish communities. And the policies that they have been enacting for so many decades are easier to understand now. So in 1982, when Israel declared Jerusalem as the eternal united capital of the state of Israel, to some people it was just a political move, a symbolic action. But now, after what we saw in Gaza, we all know that they mean that Jerusalem should not have non-Jewish communities. That they mean that Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, and every other Palestinian neighborhood in Jerusalem should be emptied of its Palestinian inhabitants. We know now that Israel's policies to restrict the movement of the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank was actually by design to empty Palestine from the Palestinian inhabitants. We understand what happened in Nakba better now. Those who have been reading about Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of 1947 and 1948, can actually understand it very well now with what's happening in Gaza. They besiege a Palestinian community and they start all sorts of torture and attacks. They massacre hundreds, thousands. Then they open so-called humanitarian corridors. Humanitarian corridors to actually ethnically cleanse the region, to wipe out this Palestinian territory or that Palestinian territory of its own inhabitants. So this is, in a way, a blessing in disguise. Although it's been a very painful 96 days, but the whole world now knows what Israel stands for. And in the efforts to free Palestine, I think the delegitimization of this Zionist regime is a necessary step. Some 75 years ago, the Jewish people had a plight. They were persecuted in Europe, of course, at the hands of the European Nazis and fascist regimes. And the West had this so-called moral obligation or moral responsibility to help the communities which they persecuted. So they, thinking as colonial masters, that's how colonial mindset works, they looked at their colonial subjects and they realized that, okay, in Palestine, we can solve the problem of the Jewish people that we persecuted in Europe in Palestine. They created the State of Israel. The State of Israel was not created by the Zionist militias alone. It was created by the colonial West. They facilitated, because of this so-called moral obligation or responsibility, they facilitated the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. And ever since, the Zionist governments have been exploiting this weakness in the West, that the West feels obliged to help Israel because they killed them, they massacred them in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and according to them, in the millions. What Israel is doing now is reversing the whole process. Israel is now delegitimizing its own existence. They are telling the whole world that we are not victims anymore. We are colonial persecutors. We commit genocide. Genocide was committed against us some 75 or 80 years ago. We are now perpetrating genocide. We were the victims, but we are now the perpetrators of massacres, and we are the criminals now. This is what Israel is telling the world, whether they say it literally or not, but this is what I read. This is, I believe, what everybody reads. When Israel started its campaign on Gaza, it was very clear from day one that it was about revenge. It was not a military strategy. Usually people go to war with some military or political objectives on mind. It wasn't the case with Israel. They went on a rampage of revenge, and eventually they thought this is a golden opportunity to achieve their long-held goal of ethnic cleansing, finishing off the Palestinian population. So by all these atrocities committed since October the 7th against the Palestinian people in Gaza and also in the West Bank, Israel is delegitimizing its very existence. It's telling the world that the moral obligation that you had some 75 years ago should change. Now the moral responsibility of the world is actually to end Israeli apartheid and Israeli occupation and to free Palestine. Coming to the immediate context of what happened on October 7th and the following weeks, we still remember the discussions all over media in the last 4 years, 2019, 2020, 2021. I'm very sure that you all heard of the deal of the century. Everybody was talking about finishing off the Palestinian issue once and for all. That's it. We are done with the Palestinians nagging and calling for freedom and for independence and whatever. Let's finish this problem. And the American solution was in the time of Trump, for instance, was the deal of the century. Let's have a peace plan which includes everybody except the Palestinians. So they had the Abrahamic Accords. They brought in so many Arab partners, and they started signing peace agreements, one country after the other. And unfortunately, the queue was long. Many OIC member states were waiting for their turn. And they sidelined and marginalized the whole problem, the root cause of the problem, the Israeli occupation of Palestine. This most fundamental problem in the whole conflict was sidelined. They started signing peace agreements with this Arab country, that Muslim country. So the Palestinian issue was brushed away. It was swept under the carpet. And the Palestinians were like literally being told, you finished. Your problem, not only the Palestinians who are resisting occupation, but even the Palestinians who were willing to work with occupation, they were all told, you're finished. Your problem is solved, but we are still under occupation. But in the eyes of the Americans, your problem is solved. Because see, Netanyahu or whatever Israeli prime minister is signing an agreement with this Arab monarch or that Muslim king. Your problem is finished. But in the streets of any city in Palestine, in the West Bank or Gaza, in the villages, in the small salons and discussions, in the households, everybody in Palestine knew our problem was not finished. We're not going to allow that to happen. The Palestinians were not ready to accept being wiped out, like what Smotrich suggested, or being sidelined, being turned into a finished chapter in history. No, they were not ready to do that. And this is why October the 7th happened. The Palestinians were willing to sacrifice as much as it takes to tell the whole world that we're still alive and we still have rights and we are not going to die silently. There are, in many cases in this contemporary world, so-called good victims. I don't want to give specific examples so that I don't name names, but there are fellow Muslim communities, for instance, which are being persecuted, ethnically cleansed, massacred silently. They die in silence. They burn whole villages in silence. And the West loves these good victims. They come and hold press conferences crying for these good victims in Washington, in New York, in London. But we're not good victims. The Palestinians are not good victims. We don't want to become a second case of Red Indians who were killed silently. Nobody knew about them except their killers. They were wiped out. And now, if you want to know about the Red Indians, you can go to museums. The Palestinians refuse to be so-called good victims. We're going to make sure that the whole world knows of our plight, that our killer pays for their attempt to kill us. And this is exactly what happened on October the 7th. The Palestinians were making a statement, basically making a statement. And it was a well-planned operation that did not target innocent civilians like what Western media has been claiming. It was targeting military targets that were committing apartheid and genocide against us already. In 2018 and 2019, during the Great Return Marches, which were very civilian, unarmed resistance activities, the Great Return March. Thousands of Palestinians protested at the borders of Gaza, near Israeli military sites. What was their fate? They were massacred. Israeli snipers, almost every day, used to shoot young Palestinian protesters. Hundreds were killed. Nobody bothered about them, of course. In the international community, it was just another day. Palestinians being killed because they demonstrate but these were civilian, unarmed protests. They were still massacred and nobody bothered. So the Palestinians did not run out of options. Okay, if Great Return March doesn't work, then we will have another Great Return March. But this time around, it's going to be conducted differently. And this is exactly what happened on the 7th of October. Another Great Return March, but not the unarmed civilian Great Return March where Palestinians die in silence. No, it was a military operation. Yes, the Palestinian resistance is not well equipped like Israel is. The Palestinians don't receive $3.8 billion of military aid that America grants Israel, for instance, every year. They make their own simple means of resistance. Most of the Palestinian resistance equipment are locally made. They use anything. Anything can be made, can be turned into a way to resist. Because in the words of Allah Yarham, Dr. Rifat Lar'ir, Palestinian academic who was assassinated by the Israeli occupation forces during this ongoing campaign in Gaza, he said in his last interview, I am an academic. I don't have a gun, I don't have weapons, I have a pen. But I'm going to resist. Even if the last thing that I can do is to throw a pen at the Israeli soldiers, I will do it. And that's exactly what the Palestinians have been doing in Gaza and elsewhere. We are a dispossessed nation, a nation under occupation, under apartheid, but we will not give up. We will not die silently. We will resist in whatever means available. And if there is a will, there is always a way. So on October the 7th, the Palestinians responded to decades of genocide and ethnic cleansing. And ever since the October the 7th attacks took place, Israel decided to do what it does best: genocide, ethnic cleansing, atrocities and massacres. But this time around, Israel's facade of democracy and human rights, its heavy makeup, wasn't put on. You see, on October the 7th, they were caught in surprise. So they didn't have time to put makeup. I know, you know, ladies know that putting makeup takes time sometimes. And on October the 7th, all the time, on October the 7th, Israel did not have enough time to put on makeup. Human rights, democracy, whatever you call it. They woke up to the Palestinians returning to their homeland and fighting back aggressively this time. So they got up in their pajamas, like a figure of speech, of course. Netanyahu and his government decided to go and attack the Palestinians, but they forgot to put on the makeup of human rights and democracy and precise strikes, precision bombs, whatever you call it, smart bombs. No, this time around, they were rushing to revenge. It was a basic emotional, instinct of survival. Of course, Israel was not in a state of disappearance. Like when they say we're fighting for our survival, that's rubbish, that's nonsense. Israel, according to Prof. John Mersheimer, a distinguished professor of international relations, is not facing a threat of survival from the Palestinian resistance factions. It's a very wealthy nation with a very sophisticated military capabilities, state-of-the-art American weapons are provided to them. They are not facing a survival threat, but their instincts, their feelings drove them. So they didn't think. They didn't put the makeup on, and they did not think how to conduct their attacks. They were out for revenge. They started committing one atrocity after the other, bombing hospitals, bombing schools, bombing mosques, bombing churches. When they sent in their troops, they started to commit every possible war crime. Snipers killing children and women, stripping the Palestinian civilians naked in streets, forced, interrogations, executions, extrajudicial executions. They committed every war crime in the book. But eventually, although they were acting out of sense or feeling of revenge. They also have some wise friends, including, for instance, the Americans. The Americans at first enabled this genocide, but later on realized that this has gone too far. Not because they care about the human rights of the Palestinians. We saw how much America cared about the human rights of the Iraqis, for instance, or the Afghan people, but because they care about Israel's image. They care about their own image. And they care about some of the international institutions which they created to run this rules-based global order. They don't want these institutions to just collapse. So suddenly, America now is touring the region, Blinken is touring the region after he enabled genocide, and is telling the Israelis, come on, you should wake up, enough. You've killed 30,000 already. What you're doing now is putting all of us in trouble. And the war might spill over to bigger actors. So you are unable to defeat Hamas in Gaza in 3 months. Are you going to be able to defeat Hezbollah, Yemen, Iran, etc.? Or probably some other actors, because they are really disturbing Jordan and Egypt. Although Jordan and Egypt have been very careful not to go into confrontation with Israel, but the way Israel's government is conducting its affairs is very annoying to these two countries. We might end up with Israel fighting everybody. So America, their so-called wise friend, is telling them, wake up, enough, put on makeup. Go to the room, put on some makeup, dress up nicely, and start talking about human rights, about peace, about two states, about this and that. And of course, the only problem that they are all facing is that Netanyahu does not want to lose power. So Israel is not a full rational actor right now, because Netanyahu as an individual is so desperate to stay in power that he is willing to risk it all, put his regime, his government, his friends at stake just to stay in power. So he is willing to go for war with Lebanon, or with even Jordan, or with whoever to stay in power. But apparently the American friends of Israel are trying very hard to save Israel from its own doings. After the South Africans took Israel to the ICJ, things are getting more serious. Yes, it might look symbolic to some, but this is a very serious measure that can actually isolate Israel internationally. Israel, again, does not want to end up becoming a pariah state like apartheid South Africa, where nobody talks to you. This will make it very difficult for them to conduct their affairs. 1 year ago, they were dreaming of making friendship with everybody in the region except the Palestinians, which was very, very naive of them, thinking that we can actually be friends with everybody in the Muslim world except the very people that we are occupying, the Palestinians. But they had this dream for a moment. Now, with Israel going to the ICJ, hopefully also soon, some of its war criminal leaders going to the ICC, I think things are changing. The tide is turning against Israel. And finally, and I will conclude with this, here comes our role as civil society organizations, academics, activists, even individuals. There is a lot that we can do. We can at least build momentum to criminalize Israel, to delegitimize its occupation, and to dismantle its apartheid rule over the Palestinians. And this cannot be achieved overnight. This, I know in the Muslim mind, we always have this great man theory, where one exceptional Muslim leader appears and leads the Muslims overnight to just defeat all the enemies. Like even the story of Salahuddin Ayyubi, the way it is narrated is like Salahuddin Ayyubi just emerged out of the blue and took Muslim armies to defeat the Crusades and liberated Bayt al-Maqdis. But it has not been like that. It was never like that. I saw an interesting book that was translated, I think, by Abim, هكذا ظهر جيل صلاح الدين. This is how Salah ad-Din's generation emerged. And in this book, I think Dr. Majid Irsan al-Kilani, if I'm not mistaken, in details documents how Salahuddin's phenomenon was actually decades or almost centuries of building up. There were the efforts of Imam al-Ghazali in educating the new generation. There were the efforts of Abdul Qadir al-Jailani in spreading tarbiyah and da'wah. There were the efforts of Imad al-Din Zinki, then Nuruddin Mahmud, then Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, who eventually managed to liberate Bayt al-Maqdis. But even after Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, his children, his very children, compromised and returned Jerusalem to the Crusades. It was a long process. So again, this kind of theory won't solve our problem in today's world, in the Muslim world in general, and in Palestine in particular. It's not going to be one man who comes and liberates Palestine and ends Israeli occupation overnight. It's not going to be like that. It is an accumulation of efforts. There should be a momentum, a build-up. So every effort counts. Your forum today counts. The rally that will take place on Saturday counts. The efforts you do on social media count. The fundraising campaigns that take place here and there count. The political statements made by the Prime Minister, the ministers, the leaders count. The efforts in the ICJ count. Efforts in ICC count. Everything counts, and it will build momentum until we all together, inshallah, dismantle this illegal apartheid regime and free Palestine. Thank you so much, and very sorry for taking a very long while. Thank you, Fazal.
It's actually very irony when I was in Kiev last October. After the escalation of the conflict on October 7th, I mean, I was there on 15 and 13. There was the conference talking about the resistance of the Ukrainian people against the Russian oppressor. It's okay because they are oppressed. But the problem is nobody in the conference are talking about what's happening in Palestine. They are glorifying the resistance, resistance movement, the resistance states against the oppressor. But nobody have this kind of courage. When it's my turn, I start up this kind of discussion. Interestingly, most of them totally agree with what I'm saying. But they are afraid, because the phenomena is not like that. The vibe during the conference is not like that. Even there are people from the resistance movement, from the American and Southern American region. There are also the groups from African. They are all talking about the very principle, the tenets of the justice, human rights, etc. But they fail to notice and acknowledge the very problems has happened in the world more than 7 decades. That has becoming human crisis, the international crisis. That is why kita selepas ini akan beralih kepada saudara Zulaiman untuk bertanya lebih lanjut tentang kontradiksi yang berlaku dalam dunia. Tapi apabila peristiwa Oktober 7 ini berlaku dan momentum itu semakin kuat, semakin hebat, malah beralihnya sokongan daripada sokongan simpati kepada Israel kepada Palestin. Itu juga kita lihat berlaku di banyak tempat dalam dunia, termasuk di kampus-kampus universiti seluruh dunia, sehingga menyebabkan presiden-presiden universiti, sebagai contoh the Harvard University President juga diambil tindakan minta untuk resign, masuk ke dalam pengadilan kerana membiarkan ataupun menyebabkan berlakunya antisemitism di dalam kampus dan sebagainya. Sedangkan itu suatu yang sudah jelas nampak lagi bersuluh begitu. Apa yang berlaku di Palestin, di Gaza khasnya, dan ini yang kita nak tanyakan kepada saudara Aiman, bagaimana momentum jaringan anak muda dan mahasiswa khas di seluruh dunia, juga community academic yang tak boleh menjadi apa yang disebut oleh Julian Benda tu sebagai pengkhianatan kaum ilmuwan. Ilmuwan juga harus bersuara menyatakan pendirian tentang perkara ini. Maka saya serahkan kepada Seorang Aiman untuk memberikan kondisi semasa bagaimana gerakan untuk bersama memerdekakan Palestin dalam kalangan mahasiswa seluruh dunia dan rangkaiannya.
Terima kasih kepada Saudara Fazril selaku moderator kita pada pagi ini. Terima kasih Dr. Imran dan atas pencerahan berkaitan situasi yang berlaku di Palestin pada masa kini. Baik, berkaitan dengan soalan yang diberikan itu, dia betul. Daripada Universiti Harvard Presiden telah dibicarakan untuk meletakkan jawatan. Sebenarnya bukan Universiti Harvard saja. Ada lagi 2 universiti. Universiti yang tersohor, yang terkenal juga, Cambridge dan sebagainya. Mereka menerima tekanan daripada di pihak atasan supaya meletakkan jawatan sebagai presiden kerana membiarkan perkara-perkara saudara-saudara mereka melakukan perkara seperti itu, iaitu menentang Israel dan sebagainya. Dan kalau kita melihat gelombang-gelombang yang dilakukan oleh mahasiswa di seluruh negara di Amerika antarabangsa, mereka konsisten, sama ada dalam skala besar atau skala kecil. Kalau kita lihat dekat negara di US, ada satu pertubuhan, satu organisasi yang dinamakan sebagai Student for Justice in Palestine. Mereka ada mempromotkan kit untuk mengisytiharkan bahawa glory to our resistance, dan juga hasil tindakan mereka itu diharamkan daripada Brandeis, Columbia dan George Washington University. Hanya segala itu saja. Tetapi kalau kita lihat pula, mereka tidak berdiam diri. Mereka teruskan dengan gelombang yang seterusnya, membuat satu demonstrasi di depan kampus, mengajak kawan-kawan di kampus, memberi kesedaran. Bahkan ada yang sanggup dituling, mereka bakar bendera Israel. Bila dah bakar bendera Israel tu pula, mereka pelajar tu diambil tindakan. Dan hasil daripada tindakan itu juga, pelakon satu demonstrasi tadi dituling. TULANE, tuling. Baik. Dan juga kalau lihat juga di Harvard dan Columbia, mereka ada buat, ada doktrin Trump yang mengisytiharkan bahawa Israel is entirely responsible di atas serangan maut yang dihasilkan pada 7 Oktober yang lalu. Maksudnya apa? Segala keganasan yang berlaku di Palestin adalah semuanya disebabkan Israel. Ini pemimpin-pemimpin dan mahasiswa di universiti yang terkemuka, Harvard dan Columbia dan sebagainya. Itu di belakang Eropah dan US. Tapi saya tak cerita lagi bagaimana berlakunya di Jerman, di France, ataupun paling dekat dengan kita di Thailand. Kalau kita melihat di Jerman, seramai 20,000 ratusan pelajar universiti yang turun ke lapangan. Bukan mereka menyerang Palestin itu, menyerang Israel itu, tak, tetapi mereka mengkritik kerajaan Jerman kerana menyokong Israel itu sendiri. Ini gerakan mahasiswa. Kalau di Perancis juga, sama juga, ratusan pelajar yang berkumpul di bandar Toulouse di selatan Perancis. Ada 7 pertubuhan pelajar bersama dengan kesatuan kerja membuat satu demonstrasi untuk menjaga ataupun meningkatkan kerajaan agar memberikan kebebasan kepada rakyat Palestin. Dan saya hari itu baru saja jumpa kawan saya di Thailand, Ruslan, di selatan Thailand. Tanya dia update bagaimana pergerakan mahasiswa di Thailand. Sangat menyedihkan. Mereka melakukan demonstrasi, melakukan wacana di Thailand, di selatan Thailand, di Universiti Naratiwa, universiti dan sebagainya. Tetapi selepas sahaja demonstrasi dan wacana itu, kedutaan Israel datang ke universiti-universiti mereka ini supaya menghentikan, jangan buat perkara itu sampai diberikan duit. Berikan duit kepada pelajar-pelajar itu supaya tak perlu menyokong Palestin. Jadi mereka-mereka ini tidak menerima, mereka meneruskan, tetapi dengan cara yang berlainan, mengadakan wacana, tidak melakukan demonstrasi secara terbuka dan sebagainya. Ini adalah gelombang yang kita dapat lihat bahawa setiap negara, mahasiswa di seluruh negara ini memainkan peranan yang penting. Mereka konsisten, mereka tidak bermusim, dan walaupun himpunan itu berskala kecil, walaupun student perdebatan pidato berkaitan dengan awareness dekat Palestin itu berskala kecil, tetapi mereka konsisten sehingga membuka mata masyarakat di sekitarnya, dan akhirnya rentetan daripada itu berlaku di gelombang yang besar di negara mereka itu sendiri, sehingga dapat mengumpulkan berpuluhan ribuan belia masyarakat untuk mempadamkan di negara-negara mereka sendiri. Jadi untuk lebih lanjut, kita tunggu selepas ini mungkin untuk soalan yang kedua daripada saudara moderator kita, bagaimana situasi, apa gerakan belia dan apa sebenarnya tantangan dan juga cabaran yang dikenakan oleh para belia kita di luar sana. Terima kasih, insyaAllah.
Terima kasih Saudara Aiman. Sebagaimana yang kita dah dengar, dan sebenarnya perkara ini juga kita telah pun dengar saban hari, adanya suatu keperluan untuk konsistensi dalam konteks mengangkat kembali gerakan-gerakan bagi memastikan perkara ini dapat diakhiri. Kerana macam mana disebut oleh saudara Dr. Muslim tadi, memang apa yang berlaku membuka pekung Israel dan juga kekejaman apa yang berlaku, dan macam yang saya pun sebutkan sebentar tadi, bila kita duduk dalam conference berbicara tentang human rights, berbicara tentang keadilan, berbicara tentang glorifying the resistance movement, tapi ironinya benda itu tak berlaku pada Palestin. Apa masalahnya? Apakah Palestin orang yang berbeza daripada kita sebagai manusia? Apakah mereka tidak punya hak untuk hidup? Apakah mereka, apa yang ada pada mereka, ya? Sebab itu menarik, saya fikir there is a quote, actually a brilliant quote by Malik bin Nabi, a philosopher as well as writers from Algeria. He mentioned that a genuine social wealth is not the possession of objects, I mean the physical wealth, but idea. Apabila kita melihat kondisi orang Gaza, no, we have this kind of we pay visit to the Ukrainian embassy previously before Muktamar, and we also support their struggle against the oppressors, but we are also telling them that what's happened in Palestine is actually the same that's happening in their country. So they are facing the oppressor, they are facing the perpetrators that has no respect to international law, and the situation is about the same, and they ask us one question. They are very wonder why the Palestinian people, the Gaza, do not want to go out from their country. I mean, they do not want to be transferred to other people, other places. So the safe corridor has not been there. And, that's the problem with the Egyptian government as well. And but why Gaza people do not want to leave their land? That correspond with what has been quoted just now, Malik bin Nabi. The genuine social wealth, the wealth of nation, is not the possession of object, but idea. The idealism is there. They want to live in dignity. They know that this is their land. They know that this is their struggle. So itu yang membuatkan kita rasa, oh, betapa kita mungkin duduk di Malaysia tidak menghadapi perkara tersebut, melainkan nenek moyang kita dulu yang mungkin berdepan dengan keadaan yang itu. Tapi betapa gagahnya orang-orang Gaza, sedangkan mereka tak punya apa-apa. Apa yang physically dipunyai oleh mereka? Rumah dah kena bom, hospital dah tak ada, ya, sekolah dah kena anak pun tak. Saya cukup sedih bila mendengar keadaan kita pun ada anak-anak, kan, bila ada ibu ayah yang terpaksa menuliskan nama anak-anak di tangan dan kaki, kerana nanti kalau kena bom runtuh, jatuh dalam runtuhan bangunan, akhirnya akan dapat paling tidak tahu tanda anaknya, ni anaknya punya jenazah. Sampai ke tahap itu, banyak lagi apa yang berlaku di sana yang tak terbayang dengan fikiran kita. Dan sebab itu saya katakan bahawa ini harus diakhiri, perang harus dihentikan, yang melakukan kezaliman, kekejaman harus diheret ke muka pengadilan. Dan kami pun ke Vietnam baru ni, sekali lagi berkunjung ke muzium perang, melihat bagaimana terfikirnya kita sekali lagi, bagaimana kuasa besar semacam Amerika itu begitu hipokrit, melakukan jenayah, tak siapa pun yang sentuh mereka, tak siapa pun yang heret. Dan cubaan itu harus dilakukan, tak boleh dibiarkan lagi. So the next question, maybe the last one, to Mr. Muslim. So as Palestinian, as well as the people that involved in this kind of diplomacy, advocacy internationally, so I know that there are a lot of frustration when we talk about these issues. But we have to jalan terus, tak boleh berhenti, berasa sedih. We have to move forward, and just want to hear from you the hope to the Muslim countries, Muslim population all around the globe. What are the strategies that we have to take up? I mean, what are the people in the Muslim majority as well as Muslim all around the globe should take? And we know, yes, for example, for instance, Malaysia and Indonesia, we are the staunch supporters of Palestinian struggle. And we know very best. So I talked to the people there in Kiev. We have no experience having colonized by Russia or China, because the Western, they are very much go against that two countries, Russia and China. But yes, we do have been colonized by the Western people, Portuguese, Spaniard, the English, British, etc. The Americans. So colonization is not a norm, and in Malaysian society, our what we call it as our psyche, as well as our ethos, we are very much sympathy to the Palestinian. Yes, it is true. If you ask us why, in the first place, we have this kind of mass rally, and then we slow down, and then come again. But maybe it is something to do with our cultures, not like what's happened in other states or another culture of other people. However, for example, the consistency in Malaysian society supporting, and also in Indonesian society supporting the struggle and the plight of Palestinian people is something that can be acknowledged. It is something very consistent, and our Prime Minister has the courage and brave enough to speak in front, at the nose, before the nose of the President of US. Stop the genocide, stop now. And that's why I want to ask here to you, your hope, please do not losing your hope. And also the strategy, especially after the Global Day of Action this coming Saturday.
Thank you so much. Before October the 7th and what ensued in the following weeks, I personally, as a Palestinian and as a Palestine advocacy activist, I always had the hope that I will see Palestine free soon. But honestly speaking, whenever I imagine, I did not know how that was going to materialize. I always thought that Palestine, logically speaking, as any occupied nation, will eventually get its freedom. But there was always the risk of becoming a second Andalusia or a second North America, where the people of North America were persecuted, ethnically cleansed, and finished. History. Where can you learn about Red Indians? In museums. There are very, very small communities still existent in the US, but they basically lost everything. So the risk was there, but I was hopeful that I will see a free Palestine. But after October the 7th and what followed, I am now very confident that Palestine will be free very soon, in a matter of years. Why is that so? Because the Palestinian people themselves have devised ways and means to defend themselves, to liberate themselves. Yes, they had to pay a heavy price for their efforts, but they realized that they can do something. And this is what, if I'm not mistaken, Dennis Ross, I think, Dennis Ross or Martin Indyk, one of these Zionist American diplomats who were heavily involved in the Middle East. One of them, I can't be sure though, wrote in a piece after October the 7th that the most dangerous impact of October the 7th is that the Arabs have realized that they can defeat Israel militarily. That's important, because if you are not defeated until you're defeated here in your mind, if you surrender, you are defeated. But if you still want to fight back, still want to resist, still have not been defeated intellectually, there is a way out. But if you were defeated intellectually, like many of our Arab brothers, who were willing to normalize relations with Israel for nothing, in return for nothing. Unfortunately, those political elites were defeated mentally and intellectually, so no hope. But their people were not. The people of those countries were not. I'm very sure. We see them now in the tens of thousands demonstrating all over the streets of Morocco and other Arab capitals. So again, for the Palestinians have not been defeated mentally. They're willing to fight back. They're willing to end occupation. The supporters of Palestine have also realized that there is a way. So for Palestinians, they realized that they can do something. October the 7th was just an example. And Israel now, with the American help, yesterday Blinken was saying, we want to make sure that October the 7th will not happen again. I assure Blinken, I am not in a position of power actually to dictate such things, but I assure him, mentally speaking, October the 7th will happen again and again and again as long as there is occupation. That's just the nature of things. The Palestinians were not defeated. Do you think that Israel has this military doctrine called the Dahye doctrine? Because in 2006, they flattened the southern neighborhood of Lebanon, of Beirut. So they had this kind of doctrine. They think that they have defeated Hezbollah and the Lebanese, that they will never fight them back. What is happening at the border of Lebanon right now? For the last 3 months, military clashes are taking place at the border between Lebanon and Israel every day. What about your Dahye doctrine? We thought that you had succeeded in, you didn't defeat the Lebanese mentally. So again, the same applies to the Palestinians. They can destroy buildings, they can kill thousands of Palestinians, but there are millions of other Palestinians who have once and for all shifted their thinking. There was a paradigm shift on the 7th of October. What happened in the minds of the Palestinians is more important than what happened in all these Israeli settlements at the border of Gaza. The Palestinians realized that you can actually drag an Israeli soldier from inside the tank and step on his head. You can. They did that. Young Palestinians, 20-year-olds. You can do that. Not because we glorify or enjoy violence. Of course not. I personally don't like violence. But to end a violent occupation, you have to resist in means that are actually suitable. It's like Newton's law of motion. Every action has a reaction. So Israel is oppressing the Palestinians violently. Of course, the Great Return March will not work. The peaceful demonstration inside Palestine where we wave white flags and tell them enough occupation is not going to work because Israel is using military force to actually oppress you. What will work is a reaction that is suitable for the Israeli violent occupation. So again, The Palestinians mentally realize that they can change it. That's number one. On the Palestinian front, a big change happened. More important than any material development. It's the paradigm shift. It's the realization of every single Palestinian political group and faction, be it Hamas, Fatah, Jihad, Popular Front, Democratic Front, every faction, every major faction. We can defeat Israel, even militarily. We can defeat Israel militarily. Because the Vietnamese defeated America. But it's not about how many tanks you have or how big your weapons are. It's about how much can you stand this confrontation. America did not stand its occupation in Vietnam. They still were more powerful. They did not stand to stay in Afghanistan after 20 years of occupation. The Americans are still more powerful. America compared to Afghanistan has how many? $25 trillion of GDP. They have their military spending is in the hundreds of billions of dollars, if not a trillion or more. They have fleets after fleets all over the world. What does Afghanistan have? What do the Taliban have? Nothing, basically, and literally compared to the Americans, nothing. But after 20 years of resistance, the Americans couldn't take it anymore. The same will happen to Israel. The Palestinians don't have much to resist, but how much can the Israeli political elite and society stand to continue sustaining the occupation? I don't think they can stand for so long. There are hundreds of thousands of Israelis leaving Israel as we speak. Hundreds of thousands. You know, in the news now, there is a real problem in Israel. Not enough psychiatrists. The good psychiatrists ran away. They can get good jobs in the US or in Europe. While the society is having this mental breakdown, they cannot take it anymore, even though they are killing us, but they are having the mental breakdown. So if Palestinians continue to mount pressure, Israel's experiment as a settler colonial model will collapse, inshallah. So this is on the Palestinian side. On the international solidarity side, and I conclude with that, the supporters of Palestine, like yourselves, can do a lot. And you can impact a huge impact, actually. What we have to do are two things. Number one, isolating Israel internationally. So this is like, in a way, a passive contribution. Number two, supporting the Palestinian resistance fully. And that's the positive contribution. So isolate Israel and support Palestinian resistance. Isolating Israel on different levels. I'll give examples. One is the direct state efforts to isolate Israel. Look at what Yemen has done, for instance. As a small state, Yemen is a small impoverished state, but they can exercise some pressure on Israel. They imposed a naval embargo. No ships are allowed to go to Israel. Let's hope other Arab countries neighboring Israel will do the same. Look at what Malaysia has done. Malaysia is very distant. You cannot stop ships going to Israel because it's really far. But Malaysia banned Israeli ships from docking in Malaysia. You cannot come to do business in our country. What if 57 Muslim countries do that? Okay, there are 2-3 regimes that are, I have no hopes for 2 or 3 of the Muslim regimes, but the rest, what about 50 countries, 50 Muslim countries? They can do a lot if these Asian, African, and Muslim countries start banning Israeli business, banning Israeli ships, banning Israeli flights. You know, Israeli flights are still heading to many Islamic OIC member state capitals. Closing down Israeli embassies, closing down Israeli commercial offices. There is a lot that can be done. So this is number one. In terms of isolating Israel, take practical measures on the state level. Number two, boycotting Israeli brands and companies on state and people level. If the ongoing movement to boycott Israel is galvanized and empowered further by the contribution of state-owned companies, for instance, big state corporations, government-linked companies, boycotting Israeli and Israeli sympathizing companies, because not all companies are Israelis, but there are many companies that provide Israel the means to kill the Palestinians. Caterpillar, for instance, providing Israel technology of all these D9 bulldozers to bulldoze our homes. Let's boycott Caterpillar. There are other companies which contribute directly to building Israel's technology of warfare, HP, this and that. If boycott is taken more seriously, boycott now is on the people level is very strong. Let's hope that Muslim governments will also take measures to boycott Israeli and pro-Israel companies. And to further isolate Israel, let's encourage our governments to play a role in all these international platforms. ICJ now. ICJ is the official UN court. If it rules that Israel is committing genocide, then every signatory country to the Genocide Convention has the responsibility to actually end genocide. So Yemen's actions become not just legal, become an obligation, that Yemen is fulfilling its obligation as a signatory country to the Genocide Convention. Let's push our government to support this ICJ effort. Alhamdulillah, many Muslim governments have supported. Malaysia is commended for its role. It was very early, one of the early countries to support and welcome it. I saw Malaysia, the Maldives, Turkey, later Jordan, Bolivia, now Brazil, as we speak. Many countries are speaking up in favor of this ICJ effort, but there is a lot that has not been done in the ICC. Different countries, governments, and institutions should push the ICC, which is not doing enough to prosecute Israeli war criminals. So far, the Prosecutor General, Karim Khan, has been evading, finding excuses. We have to push him. Just like you used to sue President Putin, President Bashir, African leaders, come and sue American leaders and Israeli leaders who are perpetrating genocide. We have to push the ICC. We have to push in the United Nations institutions. We have to push in every available platform to isolate Israel and its leaders. So this is number one, isolating Israel. And 1 year ago, I did not have the same hopes that I have today. I'm actually more hopeful now compared to the pre-October 7 situation. Because before October 7, our issue was being swept under the carpet. People just didn't bother anymore. It's finished. But now, the whole international community is trying to do something. Yes, many are afraid. Many are afraid to speak up, like you mentioned in the forum in Kiev. Many support, but are afraid to speak up. In fact, that applies even to activists here. I meet with especially non-Muslim activists in Malaysia. They say, we support you. We fully support you. We just don't want to speak up, and then maybe the backlash, maybe some of our friends will not be happy, and so on. But it's almost misconceptions. I'm sure now with all these TikTok videos that we see, white American activists speaking up very clearly, one of them crying, saying that I cannot say this in front of my parents. So, a shift is happening. We have to encourage others to speak up and play a role to isolate Israel internationally. Number two, supporting the Palestinian resistance. Rhetoric, political statements are good. Some say it's not necessary. No, it's good. It's useful, but it's not enough. We want the different governments, the different political groups, the different NGOs, the different bodies to continue contributing to supporting the resistance. Not many Muslim governments publicly support the resistance. That's unfortunate. That's why I commend Malaysia for having this courage to actually speak up. The Prime Minister spoke up several times in support of the Palestinian resistance. Very clearly, he said that we support the Palestinian resistance. We want more Muslim leaders to speak up. In the case of the Muslim world, many oppose Israel, but very few actually speak up publicly in support of the Palestinian resistance. Although, in the case of Hamas, for instance, it's a democratically elected government, but some fear the repercussions. So we commend every move to actually support and recognize the Palestinian resistance, but we have to also go to the next level and encourage others to go to the next level. We have to support them morally, materially, and most importantly, intellectually. We have to actually think in ways how to help the resistance. Because in some spheres, I see, I met with a few Muslim intellectuals recently, whose only preoccupation is how to actually find the mistakes and the problems of the resistance. And their logic is, no, look, we are thinking rationally, we want to avoid problems. you can use your intellectual capacity to actually think how to help the resistance, how to help achieve the goals of resistance and end occupation. So this is, we don't have the ledger of this uh, so-called rational, assessment of the actions of the resistance while the war is still going on. What we need to do now is to support the resistance to end the occupation, and then you come and in the comfort of this air-conditioned room can come and say, okay, resistance shouldn't have done this, shouldn't have done that, but not while they are being massacred and they're fighting back. You have the ledger to do so. So we have to support the Palestinian resistance financially, materially, morally, politically, and even intellectually. And again, this effort, the effort that will take place on Saturday, the many efforts that the Malaysian civil society groups have been doing counts a lot. It builds momentum. It encourages others. You see, in Southeast Asia, Malaysia and Indonesia really stand out. Many of the efforts that are taking place here do not happen in many other neighboring countries, although the people would like to support. So you keep doing this, you will encourage others to build on this momentum, inshallah. Thank you.
Muslim, for your really insightful comment. So, sebelum pergi kepada saudara Zulaiman, saya nak sebut juga satu pengalaman. Saya bersama dengan seorang profesor dari, dia orang Uruguay, tapi dia merupakan profesor di Spanyol. Memang international law, criminal law, itu kepakaran beliau. Jadi kami ada kesempatan untuk sembang waktu makan, waktu senggang begitu. Kita bertanya tentang beberapa perkara, kerana sebelumnya dia ada suatu macam konflik dengan seorang delegation bekas duta expatriate, lama dia berkhidmat di Indonesia, pernah jadi duta ke Amerika dan sebagainya. Memang seorang yang high level, sekarang bertugas di di sebuah think tank, pengurusi bagi sebuah think tank. Saudara Muslim mungkin kenal beliau. Waktu tu berikat ya. Saya ingat lagi peristiwa tu. Dia berikat kepada profesor ni. Tapi nanti dia tepis begitu. Dia tepis. Tangannya memberikan kad tu, dia tepis oleh profesor. Menunjukkan betapa profesor tak suka kat dia. Jadi mantan diplomat ini datang berjumpa dengan kami. Dia kata, profesor ini macam anti dengan, sebab sebelumnya ada sesi panel session di mana bekas diplomat dari Indonesia ni menyampaikan pandangan beliau. Gitu. Jadi kerana pandangan beliau itu tidak disukai oleh profesor tadi, atas sebab yang demikian, kerana saya melihat kondisi itu, kita jadi tertanya-tanya kenapa profesor itu bertindak macam tu ya. Jadi saya ambil kesempatan untuk menghampiri dan merapati beliau. Profesor ni lah nak cerita pasal profesor ni. Jadi saya tanya, kita bersembang tentang apa yang berlaku di Ukraine, apa yang telah dilakukan, ya kan, dia sebagai sebuah negara yang very compact, seluruh rakyat bersatu atas apa yang berlaku. Kita pun macam saya sebut dulu juga, tidak boleh juga menyalahkan warga Palestin walaupun memang ada perbalahan itu antara rakyat, tapi apa pun mesti diselesaikan dengan tuntas. Beliau sebut, bila saya tanya tentang bagaimana keadaan di Palestin, bukankah kita melihat memang Israel confirm violates di international law kan, dengan apa yang berlaku di West Bank sebagai contoh, illegal settlement dan sebagainya, itu confirm, memang jelas-jelas ya, convention apa yang dikeluarkan, declaration semua dia tak ikut. Malah dia memang appetite dalam konteks ruang nak masuk pun, kalau it is not necessarily you are Palestinian or Arabs, but if you are Malaysian, no Malaysia lah tak boleh masuk lah kan. If you are Singaporean, you also are not allowed to be here in the Israel territory. Macam itulah, dia tak welcoming pun orang datang ke negara dia, punyalah berfikiran begitu kan. Jadi saya nak sebut tadi dengan profesor tadi, saya tanya dia tentang macam mana Palestin. Interestingly, dia go around the bush, he are talking around the bush about what's happened in the West Bank. There are corrupt leaders, etc., etc. And then in the Gaza Strip, they are putting the people there as human shield, etc. They are using the donation money to blah 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 blah. So I told him this is not the real problem. They are in occupation. So macam tadi disebut oleh saudara Muslim, orang mencari kesalahan pula kepada mereka yang duduk di dalam penindasan, yang mencari jalan untuk keluar dari penindasan, yang melakukan resistance, melakukan perlawanan untuk pembebasan mereka. Itu yang saya fikir harus kita sama-sama perhatikan. Dan dalam konteks bercakap soal perlawanan, resistance ini, saya nak tanya kepada saudara Zul Aiman yang terakhir untuk mengakhiri forum kita. Apa, ini juga penting. Yang lebih penting dan utama adalah apa selepas 13 Januari. Kerana seluruh dunia menyatakan sikap mereka, mohon, minta, mendesak perang ini dihentikan, dibawa Israel ke muka pengadilan. Tapi apa yang harus kita lakukan, tindakan kita secara agresif khas belia mahasiswa, orang muda dan seluruh rakyat Malaysia selepas 13 Januari nanti?
Baik, terima kasih Saudara Fazril atas soalan yang diberikan. Baik, kalau kata apa yang kita perlu lakukan selepas saja pertemuan ataupun himpunan pada hari Sabtu ini. Pertama, kalau kita kata lepas himpunan ataupun perkara yang kita mahasiswa beliau sudah buat adalah pertamanya podcast, kita ada buat wacana, kita ada telah berikan memorandum kepada kedutaan US dan sebagainya. Kalau kita melakukan perkara yang sama, perkara ini dia tidak dapat membina satu momentum, tidak dapat memberikan satu tindakan yang lanjut. Dan perkara ini akan setakat itu saja. Tetapi apa yang kita boleh lakukan adalah kita agresifkan tindakan kita selepas ini, di mana kita minta menggesa pada semua pertubuhan belia ataupun pertubuhan pelajar, termasuk Persatuan Kebangsaan Pelajar Islam Malaysia yang memayungi 14 badan gabungan negeri dan juga persatuan-persatuan Islam di seluruh di kampus, untuk menghantar memorandum kepada semua kedutaan di negara kita ini, termasuklah Kanada, termasuklah Singapura, termasuklah Thailand dan sebagainya, menghantar memorandum untuk menghentikan ceasefire, melaksanakan ceasefire terhadap Israel dan Palestin. Dan bukan itu saja, yang keduanya kita boleh juga menghantarkan surat takziah kepada kedutaan-kedutaan yang pro-Palestin, dan juga kita boleh menghantar juga surat takziah ataupun nota takziah, ucapan takziah kepada wartawan-wartawan ataupun kesatuan ataupun komuniti wartawan-wartawan, kerana kita melihat bahawa Israel ini dia bukan sahaja, kalau ikut dalam law, sebenarnya kita tidak boleh membunuh wartawan sebenarnya, tetapi ini tidak bagi mereka. Dan apa wartawan ni, kalau kita nak tahu, dia mereka ada satu komuniti yang besar, sama macam satu grup lah. Kalau macam kita dalam pertubuhan belia pun kita ada satu grup pertubuhan, something like that. Kita ni berkira brotherhood. Sama juga dengan wartawan, mereka ni ada connection dan networking. Apabila kawan-kawan mereka ni kehilangan nyawa dan sebagainya, dia menimbulkan rasa sedih kepada semua anggota wartawan. Itu yang kedua. Yang ketiga, kalau rakyat Malaysia ini mungkin memerlukan kekuatan dan juga memerlukan disiplin dan kesedaran yang tinggi pada seluruh rakyat Malaysia, bahawa kita tahu bahawa rakyat Malaysia ini ada seramai 32.7 juta rakyat Malaysia. Apa kata kalau seramai ke seluruh rakyat Malaysia yang ada 32.7 juta ini, kita menghantar memorandum personal secara bersendirian, setiap seorang hantar memorandum untuk melaksanakan ceasefire terhadap Israel dan Palestin di kedutaan Amerika Syarikat. Kalau 32.7 juta itu menghantar memorandum personal, secara logika psikologinya, mereka ni manusia, mereka akan tertekan. Pihak US akan tertekan kalau 32 juta. Sebab kita dah bagi by pertubuhan, kita dah bagi by persatuan dan sebagainya. Jadi apa kata kita beri setiap seorang hasil selepas saja daripada perhimpunan pada satu ini, seluruh rakyat Malaysia menghantar memorandum bantahan dan juga melaksanakan ceasefire kepada Israel di kedutaan US secara personal melalui email dan sebagainya. Itu saja, insya-Allah. Sekian, terima kasih.
Maksudnya ada banyak kegiatan, program serta tindakan kreatif ya, pelbagai cara untuk kita lakukan. Macam disebut oleh Dr. Muslim tadi, every action counts. Setiap tindakan itu memang akan dikira sebagai sesuatu yang bukan sekadar menyumbang kepada pembebasan Palestin juga kepada kesejahteraan dunia sebenarnya. Jadi kalau masalah Palestin selesai, kita harap banyak masalah dunia yang lain juga selesai. Jadi brotherhood orang-orang yang ditindas, itu juga penting. Sebab saya sebutkan tadi, macam pengalaman kita, ada juga delegasi yang waktu kita ke conference itu menyarankan supaya dimasukkan networking the liberty brotherhood kan. Tapi sayangnya bila bercakap pasal brotherhood tak ada Palestinian. Saya rasa heran kenapa, apa yang hampa takut sebenarnya. Kerana itu dalam konteks geopolitik dunia, inilah ironinya. Apabila ada satu kelompok tertindas, ada pihak yang sebenarnya penindas juga support kelompok tertindas kerana dia jadi good victim bagi dia. Kelompok lain pula sebaliknya. Dia tindas orang lain tapi dia support kelompok tertindas yang lain kerana good victim bagi dia. Ada pertentangan geopolitik. Ini satu yang ironi. Tapi apapun kita mengharapkan ke depan, generasi kita yang ke depan adalah generasi yang celik, generasi yang pintar, yang punya keupayaan kognitif yang baik untuk menimbang antara yang baik dan yang buruk, dan menjadi generasi yang peaceful, yang aman, damai dan advocate ke arah keamanan. Saya bagi ruang 1 minit kepada setiap panel untuk mungkin kata-kata akhir bagi menutup tirai forum kita pada hari ini. So 1 minute for conclusion. Please brother.
Okay, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much, Fazril. Saya tertarik dengan idea Zulaiman, sending individual notes to the American embassy. A few days ago, I met with some Malaysian activists, liberal activists, who told me they met actually with some Western ambassadors to Malaysia to discuss the situation in Gaza. The American ambassador refused to meet, of course, unfortunately. But they mentioned that these Western ambassadors told them, after a debate and argument, you know, of course, the Western ambassador started by the Western narrative, that this is the Palestinians, this is Hamas, the Israel's right of self-defense, blah, blah, blah. Then the Malaysian activists started telling the ambassador about the reality in Gaza, the reality in Palestine and in the West Bank. They said at the end of the meeting, the ambassador was telling them, I learned a lot in this meeting. I never imagined it to be like this. So, people in modern age, in the digital era, live in their own bubbles. Termasuk duta-duta negara barat ni. Even the most sophisticated of people can actually be living in their own bubble. Kalau kita tengok the algorithm, you buka Twitter ataupun Facebook, I don't have Facebook anymore, they deleted me, but anyway, you start to check the posts, dia akan bagi post yang ada kaitan dengan post yang sebelumnya dan selepasnya. You like something on YouTube, they will start to give you the same kind of things. On Netflix, you watch this drama, the next day another similar drama appears to you. The same applies to these Western diplomats. Let's help them go out of their bubble. Let them know what is going on in Palestine. So I suggest, my proposal is, those individual or even group messages, print photos of the little babies of Gaza yang dibunuh oleh tentera Israel. This little 1-year-old baby with no limbs, the traumatized children. Print them 4 or 5, okay, color printing, tak apalah. Kita setiap orang boleh contribute lah. 4 or 5 pictures with a brief cover letter and send it to these embassies. They have to check it. They will not throw it. They have to check it. On social media, I know people go and post and comment, but I don't think the ambassador is going to check all the comments on their own website. So send this to Western diplomats. Some of them are Zionists, no hope, but many of them are humans. They believe that what is if what is happening is wrong, they will speak up, at least internally. Let's either pressure them to change their views or at least give them the mental breakdown. Let them see the pictures of the children butchered in Gaza. Not only us watching these videos and pictures and feeling sad. Let them also feel the same. So this is just a proposal, and my conclusion is that since in Arabic we say in al-jibala min al-hasa, mountains are made of small rubble, small sands. Every effort counts. If you want to build a huge building, it starts with small bricks. So this diplomatic effort counts, this demonstration counts, this forum counts, the contribution of every individual counts. It builds up to something big. Eventually, inshallah, it will make a difference. If you fill this glass with water, eventually the glass will overflow from one drop. You know, you fill it until its highest level, water will still be contained. But it takes only one small drop at the end for the glass to overflow. The same applies to all of our efforts. Everybody should do something. Eventually, inshallah, we never know what effort is the one that is going to actually tip the whole situation and end this ongoing Israeli aggression. It will come to an end, inshallah. We are, of course, caught in our short span of our lifetime. So we discuss things that are happening now, last week, last year. But in the course of history, this is a phase in the history of Palestine. It will pass. The Crusades were there for 190 years. They are history now. The Mongols who attacked the Muslim world and Palestine eventually collapsed. Israel's occupation will come to an end. It's just that we don't know when this will happen, and we have responsibility to speed up their collapse. Thank you.
Baik. 1 minit yang ada ini, saya selaku Presiden Persatuan Kebangsaan Pelajar Islam Malaysia PKPM, saya menyeru kepada semua pertubuhan pelajar, mahasiswa di seluruh Malaysia untuk bersama-sama turun pada Sabtu ini untuk menghadiri himpunan Global Day Action untuk Palestin di kedutaan US. Untuk apa? Untuk kita menggesa kedutaan US ini agar bersama-sama melaksanakan ceasefire segera kepada Israel yang mereka lakukan kepada Palestin. Kerana sebab saya merasakan ini sudah terlalu, bagi saya, over ataupun terlalu kejam dan sangat zalim sekali. Kerana mereka melakukan genosid ini sudah hampir 100 hari. Dan yang menyedihkan apabila mereka ingin membunuh kanak-kanak, membunuh bayi. Yang saya mendapat berita bahawa tentera Israel ini meletakkan bom kepada bayi itu dan dicampak kepada family dia. Dan family dia nak ambil bayi itu, tanpa sedar ada bom di bayi tersebut dan meletup bersama-sama dengan keluarga mereka sendiri. Ini taktik mereka. Jadi kalau kita tidak bendung, apatah lagi taktik-taktik kotor dan taktik yang bagi saya sangat tidak berperi kemanusiaan yang mereka akan lakukan kepada sahabat-sahabat dan saudara kita di Palestin. Jadi saya menyeru kepada seluruh mahasiswa di seluruh negara untuk sama-sama turun, tunjukkan solidariti kita secara besar-besaran, dan mungkin ini yang terbaik daripada yang terbaik perhimpunan kita pernah laksanakan sebelum ini. Jadi insya-Allah kita mengharapkan kebebasan dan hak rakyat Palestin merdeka. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, insya-Allah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih kita ucapkan kepada Dr. Muslim Imran dan saudara Zul Aiman atas buah fikiran dalam bual bicara yang telah kita laksanakan sebentar tadi. Saya mengambil kesempatan ini untuk mengucap terima kasih kepada semua yang hadir dan juga yang menonton di media sosial dalam siri forum Bitara Ikhtisas Forum, dan insyaAllah kita akan jumpa lagi pada masa akan datang. Sebelum itu saya juga menyebut sekali lagi, menyeru sebagaimana yang disebutkan oleh saudara Zul Aiman untuk sama-sama kita hadir ke himpunan Global Day of Action. Ini bukan sekadar berlaku di Malaysia tapi juga berlaku di seluruh dunia pada hari Sabtu ini 13 hari bulan Januari 2024. Khasnya di Malaysia akan dilangsungkan di depan atau hampiran kedutaan besar di Amerika Syarikat sekitar jam 12.30 hari sampai jam 3 petang. Jika siapa rajin lagi bolehlah kita berkemah lagi di depan kedutaan. Tapi apapun tindakan yang lebih agresif akan kita buat, akan kita lakukan bersama menggembling seluruh tenaga yang ada bersama dengan rakan-rakan civil society organizations, badan masyarakat madani, NGO, pertubuhan-pertubuhan sosial yang lain akan sama-sama buat lebih lagi, pergi extra mile selepas 13 Januari ini insya-Allah. Saya ucap terima kasih sekali lagi. Kita akan bertemu dalam siri forum Bitara Ikhtisas Forum pada masa akan datang. Sekian dulu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kenyataan media Majlis Belia Malaysia bertarikh 11 Januari 2024. Palestin Merdeka. Pernyataan sikap Gerakan Belia Malaysia berhubung Himpunan Global Day of Action Ceasefire Now, Stop the War on Gaza. Majlis Belia Malaysia dan seluruh badan gabungan menyatakan keprihatinan kami terhadap situasi krisis kemanusiaan tidak berkesudahan yang berlaku di Gaza, Palestin. Perang genosid Israel ke atas Gaza yang hampir memasuki hari ke-100 ini merupakan suatu sisi gelap sejarah kemanusiaan dalam peradaban dunia. Ketika mana seluruh dunia gegak gempita mendesak pembantaian oleh Israel dihentikan, Israel dengan sokongan segelintir kecil negara yang mengaku kuasa dunia terus-menerus mengebom kediaman, fasiliti kesihatan, prasarana awam, malah tanpa segan silu menghancurkan fasiliti yang dibangunkan oleh badan dunia seperti Pertubuhan Bangsa Bersatu PBB. Angka korban yang kian meningkat kini mencecah lebih 20,000 nyawa menjadi mangsa kekejaman, termasuk golongan wanita, kanak-kanak, warga tua, para wartawan, petugas PBB dan banyak lagi. Manakala beribu-ribu lagi warga Palestin masih hilang dan dianggap telah terbunuh di bawah runtuhan kediaman dan premis akibat dibom secara tidak berkemanusiaan oleh tentera penjajah Israel. Akibatnya dianggarkan lebih 1.7 juta rakyat Palestin kehilangan tempat tinggal dan berdepan dengan masalah kebuluran, di samping terdedah kepada ancaman pelbagai wabak penyakit yang memudaratkan. Masyarakat antarabangsa telah gagal bertindak untuk menuntut supaya Israel menghentikan serangannya dan mengenakan gencatan senjata kekal untuk menamatkan pembunuhan ribuan mangsa demi memastikan bantuan kemanusiaan segera dapat dihulurkan kepada penduduk Gaza. Israel dengan angkuh semakin berleluasa dan sewenang-wenangnya mengetepikan desakan global. Mewakili belia Malaysia, kami menyeru seluruh rakyat untuk menyatakan sikap, menzahirkan sokongan dan meningkatkan usaha desakan dan advokasi dalam pelbagai cara untuk menamatkan peperangan ini. Tidak dapat dibayangkan dengan akal yang waras bagaimana dalam dunia serba moden ini kebiadaban suatu bangsa angkuh seperti Israel yang membantai dan membunuh manusia saban hari dibiarkan terus berlaku sehingga mencecah hampir 100 hari. Oleh demikian, sempena Hari Bertindak Global untuk Gaza, Global Day of Action, Ceasefire Now, Stop the War on Gaza, yang akan dianjurkan seluruh dunia pada 13 Januari 2024 pada hari Sabtu nanti, belia Malaysia menyuruh seluruh warga Malaysia hadir memberikan sokongan dan bersolidariti bersama seluruh masyarakat global untuk bersatu mendesak gencatan senjata kekal demi menghentikan genosid di Gaza, Palestin, serta menamatkan penjajahan dan pengakhiran dasar apartheid Israel. Himpunan Global Day of Action Ceasefire Now Stop the War on Gaza di Malaysia akan diadakan pada 13 Januari 2024 hari Sabtu dari jam 12.30 hari hingga 3 petang bertempat di kawasan berhampiran Kedutaan Besar Amerika Syarikat Kuala Lumpur. Kami juga mendesak agar segala usaha untuk mengheret Israel ke muka pengadilan digiatkan agar terhentinya secara kekal kezaliman yang berterusan selama lebih 7 dekad ke atas warga Palestin. Palestin merdeka. Seperti mana yang telah diberikan atau dinyatakan di dalam kenyataan media ini, badan-badan gabungan dan bersekutu Majlis Belia Malaysia terdiri dalam kalangan pertubuhan belia di peringkat kebangsaan dan Majlis Belia Negeri terdiri daripada 41 pertubuhan. Sekian, terima kasih.
Free, free, free. Free, free Palestine. Free, free. Free Palestine. Free Palestine. Free, free Palestine. From the river to the sea. From the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea. From the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free. Takbir. Allah. Takbir. Allah. Takbir. Allah.
Terima kasih kepada semua. InsyaAllah ada lagi